we have Joanne Ozug. Welcome. She is the host of the Road to Carnivore podcast and a self-proclaimed meat evangelist, debunking the plant-based, health narrative. So welcome to Recommended Daily Dose. We're happy to have you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So I'll just start off because it seems there's, Coleman is squarely in the team meat camp.
I just had a cheeseburger for lunch too.
Oh boy.
Delicious.
Nice.
So I'll be full disclosure. I am a pescatarian. I'm not a vegan. I'm not even a vegetarian. I'm a pescatarian, but I am trying to get more plant-based. So for me, it's very intriguing. And we're just gonna let you start, right? Because there's a lot to talk about, I think.
Yeah. So I am a carnivore. A lot of people throw that around like they eat meat. And I say, no, I only eat meat. I do not eat plants of any kind. And just to say right off the bat, I understand where you're coming from because right before I tried carnivore, I totally bought into the plant-based health narrative. And most of what I was eating was plants, things like raw vegetables, kale salad, drinking green juice. I totally believed it. I'm not sure that there was a lot of disbelief, and I was basically forced to believe initially in a different narrative. And now actually there's a tremendous amount of science that points to why carnivore is so effective for people and putting all sorts of disease and symptoms and things into remission. But so anyway, when I tried carnivore, it's just on a whim. I had been dealing with I've kind of had a lot of health issues chronically. But at the time I was dealing with some really severe bleeding from hemorrhoids. It was severe to the point where I was supposed to get surgery. I didn't want to because I was breastfeeding at the time, and it's sort of a long story, but I didn't want to go through the anesthesics that would have required me to wean. And the bleeding was so bad though, that it looked like I was menstruating when I was not. It was really painful and severe. And I could not figure out how to get it under control. I tried everything except for surgery. And I just by chance came across a video on carnivore by someone named Dr. Paul Saladino. And I don't know why the YouTube algorithm showed that to me, because I thought it was insane and restrictive, and I just didn't make sense initially. And after watching this, I was like, this actually, this does make sense to me. There's sort of an evolutionary argument for it. And I felt like I was desperate, nothing to lose. I decided to try it. Within 3 days, my bleeding was gone. And I had been struggling with it for, upwards of a year. And other things like chronic reflux, I've endoscopy, colonoscopy, taken all sorts of medication for my whole life. That went away. Tonsil stones, like gum bleeding was reduced, all these curious things. There's a lot of cognitive dissonance happening. And then 2 weeks in, I fell off the wagon at a birthday party, and I had cake and pizza and things, and the bleeding started again immediately. And I decided that day that I was going to do carnivore for a couple of months. And the health, I didn't even think health like that was possible. And I come from a background where literally my career was developing recipes. I worked in the food industry. Food was my everything, as my emotional attachment, as my career. And carnivore has made me change my entire life because it's that compelling. And the last thing I'll add is that with the plant thing is for 4 years prior to carnivore, I had done, all the things that are grouped with it, like keto, paleo, low carb, Atkins. And at that point of carnivore, it's having the bleeding and stuff, I already wasn't eating sugar, gluten, kind of any of the seed oils, a lot of the things that people all agree are, probably not healthy. The difference for me was literally dropping Brussels sprouts, kale, all the things I thought were so good for me. So, and, now I understand that, we say these things are healthy, but they're actually full of many, thousands of compounds that we tolerate to, in differing degrees. It depends on what kind of plant it is, but no plant is as well tolerated as meat for human physiology is my experience and what the science points to.
All right. So obviously there's a lot to digest there. So just first of all, is it carnivore? So it's the movement or the process of the process of the description of only eating meat is not carnivorism. It's just carnivore. Is that the just the proper term? I've never heard it said that way.
Yeah, just the carnivore diet, I guess, would be the proper term. I just say carnivore.
And before we even jump in, so you were saying pizza, chips, anything, fine, no fruit, no vegetables, everything comes from animals. Is that so, including liquids besides water, I'm assuming, right? But what does that mean? There's absolutely nothing other than meat in your diet?
Or maybe can you just explain your daily routine? I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, exactly. Or what, like a sample of what you would normally
like she doesn't drink meat juice for breakfast. Is that what you're asking?
I didn't know how to say it, but I was thinking, again, this is coming from someone who's predominantly plant-based, how to come up with the idea of meat juice. But
only steak juice.
Steak juice.
Oh, okay. That sounds good, actually.
Yeah. So literally just meat, seafood, and eggs. A lot of carnivores have dairy. I don't tolerate dairy, so I don't have it. But technically that would be carnivore. I only drink water. I don't drink coffee or tea. Again, a lot of carnivores, they don't give that up, but I never really got into coffee. So that was an easy one for me. I usually eat 2 meals a day. It kind of, when I was transitioning and before I was fat adapted, I would have maybe 3 or 4. I mean, if I was hungry, I just ate meat because I needed to have that crutch a little bit with, the mental, emotional attachment to the, cake or other things that I have always wanted, but aren't good for me. They're very painful. And I guess toward the beginning, I had a lot more variety. There's this notion with carnivore that the longer you do it, the less you care about variety. And I always thought, oh, that won't be true for me. I'm a recipe developer. I love tasting all these things. It's true for me. I love my typical daily meal. Let's see, might be grilled burger patties with salt for lunch, and then dinner, maybe a couple of eggs and part of a steak, or, it's mostly red meat. And something that's been really fun to figure out is that I noticed early on with carnivore that meats like chicken and pork didn't quite give me the same satiety as ruminant animals like beef, lamb, bison. And there's actually, I forgot the study it is, it's some crazy name, but there are specific types of fat in ruminant animals that are gut to text for that sense of satiety that is not in chicken and pork, even though I do eat those as well.
I think that's a good point too, meaning the amount of times you eat a day, right? So if you look at people who eat a lot of carbs, they tend to snack and eat over and over again because carbs are so addictive. And I know when I eat a steak, I'm good for probably next 8 to 12 hours. So that's pretty interesting. I want to, where do you think we got to this point where plants were good and meat is bad, all else being equal, no matter what kind of plants you eat or the volume you eat, or you think that's an industry thing or a scientific thing that got out of hand?
Oh, it's totally like industry and profit. And if you just take, a few hours and look into some of the history behind food, you will see incredible amounts of unethical shenanigans, I'll call them. Olive oil is thought to be the healthiest oil. That is the result of a brilliantly carried out marketing campaign. It is not healthier than butter or tallow. I just posted something on Instagram the other day about how in the 1960s, the sugar industry paid off Harvard scientists to, there were basically starting to be a lot of studies and scientists who believe that sugar played a role in the heart disease, the big rise at that time. And so they paid these Harvard scientists to, and they didn't disclose this, by the way, they paid them to kind of shift the attention toward fat and blame fat and kind of discredit some of those studies. There's just so many examples of that, even with different kinds of fat. The soybean industry has vilified, competitors like palm oil or different kinds of fats. There's so much, it's just riddled with bias, really.
Remember, I think some of the doctors in medicine is to blame. We pivoted from, as far as heart healthy, eating less fat, whether it was good fat or bad fat, to eating more sugar and carbs. We started with the food pyramid where we had to have a vegetable, a starch, and a meat. Then we went to all fat is bad. Now we're back to fat is good, carbs are bad. So
just from the science in medicine, I would be extremely concerned for anyone pursuing this diet. I mean, Clinton, you started right away. I mean, are you worried about someone going into kidney failure?
No, but you can still get in kidney failure from plants. What do you say to people who say that, all meat diet is not necessarily healthy?
Okay, so first I want to address this cancer thing.
Yeah.
As far as I know, and if you have something, I would genuinely like to see it. As far as I know, and many other MDs in the carnivore space, there is not a single study that shows any sort of danger with regard with meat and cancer that isn't observational. There was like the WHO or some IARC report or something, suggesting that it might be a mild carcinogen. But if you look at the studies that they picked from, and if there are actually any statistical correlations, like it's baloney. I think there's one that was done, and if you look into the details of it, it was a Seventh-day Adventist community, and they are very openly, they don't even try to hide it. They are against consumption of meat, not just by members in their church, but for everyone. And they do a lot of they take a lot of action to push their vegetarianism onto the world and into dietary guidelines. They've had a huge influence on dietary guidelines from very early on. And I think aside from the fact that, as I said, I don't think there's any single study that shows that in a non-epidemiological observational way, but humans ate almost exclusively fatty meat for 2 million years and little else, like virtually nothing else. It doesn't make sense to me that this food that made our brains grow at huge rates, shortened our colons over time, kind of shaped us into this apex predator, shaped us into the humans we are today. It doesn't make sense that that would be causing cancer, all these kinds of diseases that are really modern diseases, that the levels of obesity, like diabetes, autoimmune diseases, all these things are very modern, unprecedented rates of disease. And even 100 years ago, most of the American diet, it was very heavy on animal foods. A lot of it was dairy, eggs, meat. The plant-based focus is very new when you look at the historical timeline of what humans have been eating.
And I agree with you. I would argue that 100 years ago, the average lifespan of a human was 55. And so most diseases, as we get older, cancer is a disease that we get over time. And so that's one, is that life timelines are much longer. And so, decreased cancer 100 years ago would not be relevant to today. The idea that, and again, this is just a conversation, so I've heard this idea that we evolved through eating meat and that's what made our brains bigger. There's a lot of studies have shown us actually the socialization of getting together, going for a hunt that actually developed our brains, and not so much the idea of meat. But one could also argue that we don't live like that anymore, right? So just because we evolved a certain way, we are not hunter-gatherers. We are not running around the forest and spending most of our time in a caloric deficient state where any input, any food, and you're absolutely right, predominantly meat would suffice. So how do we take that in our modern world? Now we live in a modern world where we have a huge population. We have to look at things like sustainability, environmentalism, all the things that Clinton Coleman hates, but that I talk about.
Yeah, I mean, you said we're not hunter-gatherers, but we also kind of are. Our bodies are ancient. It takes, on the order of tens of thousands of years for our genomes to change in a drastic way. And so I think, yes, we live in this modern world, but a lot of these foods, the substances we're eating, are extremely modern. I mean, wheat is an example where the modern wheat today contains novel compounds that didn't exist 50 years ago. And what's so interesting is initially scientists believed, there must have always been this rate of celiac disease, and it just wasn't diagnosed, or we didn't know. But they found the contrary, where there are actually skyrocketing rates of celiac disease from these new compounds. This idea that you take two, quote unquote, safe plants and breed them, and, whatever comes from it must also be safe, is actually not true in practice. There are different compounds that are created. And just as a fundamental fact about plants versus meat, plants don't want to be eaten. They are living organisms that want to reproduce and thrive just like us and animals on this planet. And because they're stuck in the ground, they can't claw your face off or run away. How they deter, insects, animals, us from eating them is by producing compounds that affect our systems in different ways. And, gluten is such a mainstream, example that is an example of a compound that we don't tolerate. And there just are various things like sulforaphane and broccoli, for instance. It doesn't get formed until a deer or something comes along and eats it. And there's so many different, soy affects the reproductive system. There's all sorts of different compounds that affect our bodies in different ways. And even in medicine, historically, things like aspirin or things that lower or raise our body temperature, we have figured out what these different compounds do, and we use them when we need to. Like if you have a fever, you want to bring your temperature down. But that compound wasn't produced by the plant to help us out with a fever. It's trying to mess up our temperature regulation, or it does do that for some reason. So yeah, I think sometimes the whole caveman thing, we live in modern life, and it is different, but our bodies, there still is an ancient quality to them. These things that we're eating now that we weren't 100 years ago, that we don't just adapt to it all of a sudden. And I think the rates of disease and obesity and unhealth really reflect that.
What about the notion that, plants have more nutrients than meat, and the reason why the beef that we eat is nutritious is because it ate the plant? There's some thinking of bioavailability and how, the reason why we absorb more nutrients through meats is because, the cow, who's probably better equipped to digest the grass, did a better job than that. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, plant foods are nowhere near as nutrient dense as any animal product. I remember I used to, even in my food career, I'd be like, oh, a half cup of carrots is 100% of your daily vitamin A. No, it doesn't. You convert 3% of it. It's not the same, operating system, quote unquote, as animal foods. We have to convert it, and the conversion rate is extremely poor. It was kind of, I had to work through that in my brain a little bit, because I felt like brainwashed into thinking that I needed to eat, turmeric and chia seeds and acai bowls and all these things to get nutrients, when you can get all the nutrients you need from meat. And there are actually, many vitamins and things that you can only get from animal products that you won't get in, a vegan diet.
So for instance, what? Because let's say my family's from India. We represent the largest percentage of a country that's vegetarian in the world. We're also 1.2 billion souls. So clearly, through time, a vegetarian diet has been prolific in the ability to spread, our people across the planet. So what are we missing in all the thousands of years of vegetarianism from not eating, from about 80% of the population that attributes to themselves to being vegetarian? And what are we missing?
Yeah, I won't necessarily say that vegetarianism is bad. I mean, there's still animal products of some sort. And if I'm not mistaken, there's a lot of dairy in Indian cooking. I'm not.
That is true. Yes, there is dairy.
But yes. I think there's a difference between vegetarianism and veganism.
Sure.
And I think that, even the tolerance of plants. So for example, we can talk about all this stuff all day, but what I love about something like changing your diet is you can actually see the response for yourself. And for example, in the carnivore industry, there's been a little bit of back and forth and some argument over whether fruit is a good thing to include, because it's on the spectrum of toxicity for plants, it's lower in toxins. And there was a time when I was like, maybe I should try introducing a little bit of fruit. And I had an apple, and I was buckled over in pain the rest of the day from the gas. I had acid reflux, and it was horrible. And I just thought, why would I eat this? And I think that some people, maybe they can tolerate some of these things. And I think something I was talking to someone about this recently, that it's crazy. For all my life, one of the problems I had was severe gum bleeding, major bone loss, and gum recession. And I'd have to get these scalings Like it would take an hour to do each quadrant of my mouth, and it's expensive and painful. And I didn't understand because I was doing all the medicated mouthwashes, and like, I'm very type A with my dental hygiene, could never do anything about it. And when I went into the dentist to get my gum pockets measured after a few months of carnivore, everything had improved. There was no bleeding. She said the old diseased gum tissue she'd seen, like it rolled away, pockets improved. And, you know, there was a time when I had a few tablespoons of tomato sauce, or even if I have like chocolate or various things, my gums throb in pain when I do so. It is excruciating. I basically have to take the rest of the day off. And, you know, I didn't notice that before because I was just used to gum pain and bleeding all the time. And I think people might think they're thriving on, you know, a vegetarian diet. I'm not going to say that's for everyone to decide for themselves, right. But
is it possible that we're all on the same team? And I guess the villain is actually probably processed foods and complex carbs. Because I think, you know, I've had patients who go on a pure vegan diet, lose weight, feel better. I've also had patients going on all meat diet, feel better, lose weight. Mm-hmm. So I think we may be fighting each other unnecessarily.
You know what, though? I agree with that, but I think for a long time, I latched onto the idea, well, maybe it's just about having real food from scratch. But the difference for me was literally like the produce section. I would buy Brussels sprouts and green beans and salads. And that was the difference for me, is those plants. So, and everyone kind of regards those as healthy. So yeah, for me,
or maybe everyone doesn't fit into the cookie cutter, you know, well-balanced. Some people just need all meat for their nutrition requirements. Some people need all vegetables for their nutrition requirements. What are your thoughts about the argument that it's morally bad to kill animals for our benefit? Because, you know, I consider us to be predators, and that you know, you're not telling the lion hunting the gazelle, don't eat the gazelle, just eat a, you know, Impossible burger or some vegetables, right? So I mean,
yeah. So I think that ultimately that's something everyone has to decide for themselves. I mean, I understand if that's someone's personal choice, but I think the fact of the matter is that death is a part of life on Earth. It is. And there are animals eating other animals. It's just how it works. And I think when there's sort of this like notion with carnivores, like vegans only care about the cute animals, because there are many instances with environmental things and, you know, clearing lots of land for like almond milk or whatever, these plant-based things. There's a greater loss of life. You know, something like a cow can feed one person for, I think it's like 1.5 cows per year. I forgot exactly. If a carnivore is eating 1.5 to 2 pounds of meat and a cow is like 800 pounds, like I've looked for months, and I have a podcast episode on it. I needed to look at the environmental piece. I needed to think about the ethical piece. I've went through all that. And for me, like, yes, I value life, but I sort of made peace with all of that. And I understand if someone feels differently, but I think so few people have actually looked at that in like a full picture kind of way. And I've had even like vegans write me and say basically that all the stuff that they learned in those documentaries are actually not true. And, you know, again, everyone can decide, but I think so few people have actually done a full like exploration of the research.
Right. But how does the pescatarian feel about the industrialization of, you know, fishing and, you know, killing hundreds of thousands of fish at a time for your fish sandwich?
Well, obviously, as you can imagine, it's a complex issue, right? So in India, which is predominantly Hindu, the cow is sacred, and it's considered abomination of over 1 billion people even consider eating a cow. And then I'm not a vegan, so I drink milk, I eat cheese, and I eat fish, right? So someone that's vegan will say, well, you're just as bad, you know? So there's that morality issue, which I agree is a personalized issue. And the joke about veganism is like, you know, someone's vegan, they want you to know about it. So am not vegan. I'm not even trying to put my ideas on other people. But if we take that idea, and that's like a cultural idea, I get that that's not how a lot of the rest of the world is. But if you look at the environmental avenue, I am very big into climate change and what humans are doing. Is it really sustainable to think that we can live on a meat-based diet? Keep clearing, right? All these animals need to eat, so you keep clearing the rainforest. You know, a lot of these cows come from Brazil and other places.
Drive gas cars.
Is it really sustainable? I mean, even farmed seafood, you're right, you know, doesn't taste the same. Is it ethical? You know, someone might say, well, they're lower brain species. They don't have a cerebellum. They don't have higher order thinking. You know, if you look at higher order animals, they very clearly feel pain. If you've ever been to you know, and seen the animals right before they're slaughtered, it's terrifying. And again, you can take, that's all emotion. So when we dealt with the science, and I think you'll agree that anywhere in food science, the science is very poor, right? So one of my roles that I fit is, you know, the medical director of our research institute. So I'm well aware of clinical research, randomized clinical trials, and well aware of how poor the quality of science has been for a long time in food science. And I don't know anyone's going to do a randomized clinical trial of people who eat meat versus people, and, you know, clinic blinded, you eat meat, you don't, and see what happens, right? They're all either observational or retrospective or chart reviews or what have you. So I agree, the science, it has a long way to go in the food industry anyway. But if we just now go towards the morality, and that's very personal, so fine. What about something more objective? Is this really sustainable for the planet? As we have now 6.5 billion souls, continue to go on. Can we really expect, and now I know you mentioned 800 pounds of meat from one cow. I'm not 100% sure that, and I'll admit I have to look, but my understanding is that if you look at meat versus plant-based, an economy of scale, you're much more efficient feeding humans with a plant-based diet. And it's really not sustainable to think that we can all eat meat, both from a environmental point of view, a byproducts with climate change, and just really running out of space. So, I mean, that's kind of the way I look at it, right? There's three things. There's the science, there's the morality, culture, which is very objective or subjective, but then the more objective issues. And so I still circle back, and I very rarely agree with anything the guy at the bottom of our screen has to say, but he did mention balance and non-processed. And I think, at least to me, a lot of people who I've come across who advocate a high meat diet will still say, you know, whatever you're eating is unprocessed, and still have a balance between healthy vegetables and fruits and meat. So sort of the idea of a 100% carnivore diet is very unique and very new to us. I think time will have to tell. I don't know necessarily it has to be an us versus them mentality. What I've seen on social media, which I try to stay off as much as possible, but you get sucked in, right? Very much, you know, one camp being the drum and the other camp being the drum. And I've always believed there must be a happy medium, right? So even as a physician and not as a physician, just in general. So I think we have to look where the science takes us. What about you, Clinton? What are your thoughts? I mean, you know, she's very.
I'm wondering why you're waving that pen around like you're taking notes or something.
I was taking. Well, you know, I'm doing two things at once. I'm answering pages from the ER and talking to you, both of you.
You're walking and chewing meat.
That is how talented I am. That is how talented. But I mean,
I find it odd that we've vilified one food group and praised the other one without any. Like, why isn't it just as weird to eat all plants as it is to eat all meat? You know, like I just think that's weird. So
well, no,
I've done the vegan for weeks and months, and you know, I felt different. I don't know if I say better. My digestive system changed. I don't know for the better or the worse, but
you still look the same. You still look pretty washed up.
But I don't. That to me, that's, you know, physically that's not sustainable. Like I think balance is key. I think
Yes.
we really have to rethink how we view food and who's saying, you know, what's good, what's bad. And I think it has to be an individual thing. But I take offense to you saying that you know, meat is bad. And you're driving.
I've never said meat is bad.
Car. You use propane in your house. You overindulge in things that hurt the environment. You use hairspray for your hair.
Not anymore.
Bad.
No, I've never said meat is bad. I think if you look at the blue zones in the world, the areas of the world where people live the longest, so parts of Sicily, parts of the Mediterranean, parts off the coast of Japan, it has always been the Mediterranean diet that comes back. And so, Joanne, I know you have experience with food, and even before. I mean, I'd be interested to know what are your thoughts on the Mediterranean diet, which I'd always thought was very reasonable. Lean cuts of meat, fish, but also lots of healthy legumes and fruit. Oil. Now you're saying olive oil is not as good as we think it might be, but so would you say that the Mediterranean diet is really not all it's cracked up to be? Because I'd always I don't do a primary care. I kind of specialize in my own specialities, but
thank God.
If patients ask me, I've always kind of advocated the Mediterranean diet as a way of balance.
That's all nonsense.
Nonsense.
The blue zoo and the Mediterranean stuff is nonsense. If you actually go and look at the details of the study, like there's so many factors in it that like what they're concluding is not reasonable from like the data they're gathering. I mean, I forgot one of them, they did it during Lent when they weren't eating as much meat. Like I cannot summarize it concisely. I can send you things, but if you look into it, there are so many reasons why it's not compelling sound science, at least to me. And I think just to loop back around to what you're saying about the environmental piece.
Yeah.
I feel, and I totally recognize every bit of research I do, I try to look for that there's bias in everything, but even taking that into account, I feel that my environmental footprint from my food eating meat is far better than what I was doing before with the plants. And there are so many ways where animals are essential environmentally for the land. And a lot of the plant agriculture is decimating the land. I forgot there was a UN, basically all of the arable topsoil will be gone in 60 years if things continue at this rate. And there are so many ways that plant based food and farming is destroying the earth. And it's not to say that everything about producing animals is perfect. There's a lot of problems with it too. And I think we've seen good progress, and it should be made in terms of doing more grass-fed or just better ways of raising animals. But I think a lot of people think, meat is bad for the environment, plants are good. And that's just totally a false takeaway from what reality is. And even things, you said like the idea that there's not enough room for the animals. They take up too much land. They take too much water. All of those things I've looked at and addressed, and they are false. I think that meat, it's so interesting how meat and like beef, they're so scapegoated, and there's such a tiny piece of like the total environmental impact. It's so much more from transportation and industry and things. And for some reason, there seems to be it's like largely focused on animals. And I just think it's, first of all, not accurate, and it's very curious. And a lot of that is focused.
I know the EPA and the WHO and even the FDA have all said that approximately 25, and I know even climate change science, depending where you are in the political spectrum, is very controversial, but they would say about 25% of all greenhouse gases come from the methane produced by cows on the earth. Would you say that's then false, or would you say that's not significant?
I would like to see where that number comes from, because it's lower from what I've seen. And the other thing about the whole methane argument is that there's something called the biogenic carbon cycle with cattle, where it's the same methane molecules cycled in this 12-year cycle back and forth in the soil and back around. Whereas when we are, doing this fossil production, we are releasing new methane from the ground into the atmosphere. It's different. It's not all, it's all chemically the same methane, but it really is two different things. So, and there's so many studies, I linked to it in my environmental episode, where there's more cattle and the methane doesn't necessarily increase. There's a lot of contradictory stuff there. I don't think that's,
Is there any like chronic illnesses? I mean, gout comes to mind, where the carnivore lifestyle or diet would not be recommended.
No, I've heard people have asked me about the gout, and you look at where that comes from and it doesn't seem sound to me. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but
usually a high purine diet. So
yeah, so it's organ meat, specifically alcohol, or I mean, they call it the
shellfish, alcohol, but it's also, people have underlying kidney disease as well. So
yeah, so I would say, Clinton, would you be comfortable in a patient who has stage 2 to stage 5 kidney disease on a carnivore diet?
It depends on the protein allotment. So I think we can't just lump everything into.
So if they're eating eggs, you'll be okay. But if they're eating,
yeah, as long as you stay under your 1.2 grams per kilogram protein per day, I think that's fine. But that's not. There's nothing special about meat protein as compared to different types of protein. So I think it's important to eat more fat. Because I really like the ketogenic diet, more fats, more proteins, less carbs, and that shows as far as reduction in heart disease and diabetes and high blood pressure. But no, there are some. So yeah, if someone has gout, I would say eat less purines, eat less specific these types of foods. But also, for people who have kidney stones, you want to eat less oxalate. So
right.
You mentioned plant toxins. I don't know if oxalate was one of them you were referring to. But when I give people a list of foods to avoid with kidney stones, it's the spinach, rhubarb, chocolate, nuts. It's something you think is healthy. So when I actually give those patients that list, they're like, these foods are healthy. Why are you telling me not to eat it? Because some of them are too much of it's toxic. So I think it's it's balance. It's both sides. Take that, woke vegan mob.
I think again, you're coming at me. You're saying balance.
Woke.
We're talking about either
mob.
vegan or we're talking about an all meat diet, where I'm telling you I'm neither one. So how is that? I still want to know. And you keep advocating balance. So explain to me how, for you, how is a carnivore diet balanced? How does that represent balance to you?
No, I'm not. No. I'm against vilifying vegan, vilifying vegetarian, vilifying meat. I think your diet should be specific to your needs. So if you have digestive issues, you should avoid gluten. Like gluten is healthy to the next person, right? Or if you have digestive issues with plants, which is very common, you need to eat less of them. But practically, for me, I don't think I can get away with eating meat 24. I would love to, but logistically, it may be hard for me.
Can you drink alcohol? So Clinton likes his wine.
I drink alcohol every day.
And his malt liquor. So can you have can you have fermented meat juice? Is that what you would suggest? Or is
You're an idiot.
Well, okay, so I just want to say about the disease thing.
Yeah.
Like you're talking about, what diseases might come from carnivore. I haven't heard of anything, but what I have heard very strongly,
or that would be a red flag that maybe this diet is not for you. If there's a certain underlying, besides a metabolic disorder, you can't metabolize certain proteins or things in meat. Are there any? I'm thinking, because gout, for one, is what comes to mind very clearly, and then also chronic kidney disease if you're eating too much protein from red meat. But are there any other? And I was really thinking out loud. Are there any specific diseases that one would want to consider before saying, "Hey, I want to pursue this as part of my own personal dietary lifestyle"?
Listen, if we as doctors can't really think of it off the top of our heads, I think that answers the question probably itself.
Well, would you say someone having heart disease with underlying dyslipidemia or underlying metabolic syndrome?
That would for me, that wouldn't be my first choice. I would say reduce your carbohydrates.
Right. Well, see, here's the thing though, is that what is incredible on the flip side is the incredible list of diseases that carnivore puts into remission or vastly improves, like diabetes, for example. Virtually everyone can go off diabetes medication with that kind of diet, like a ketogenic, like some sort of low carb diet. Autoimmune diseases, people reversed osteopenia, fertility issues, PCOS.
Is that because of the meat or or staying away from the carb? I guess that's
or sugar for that matter.
Yeah. I mean, autoimmune seems to be more related to the plant compounds people don't tolerate, and a lot of those gut issues. Whereas something like diabetes, that's more about the lack of carbs.
Right.
And I think that I just lost my train of thought. It's okay. It's a variety of things, but I kind of love that about meat because it kills so many birds with one stone. You get that nutrient density. You don't have those plant toxins, and there are no carbs in meat. So
I think it's fascinating to hear a different side of the story. It's refreshing. I want to have a steak tonight.
You should do that.
Do you snack on like beef jerky or no? That's processed. Or all right. So do you eat processed meats too, or more it's like fresh?
Rarely. I prefer fresh meat. I'm not against that. I ate more of that in the beginning when I needed the variety. I just don't really care anymore. I mean, even bacon, it's like sacrilege to say, but I'd rather have a burger or a steak. I like bacon, but it's kind of lost its appeal a little bit.
I think we need to get back to our roots.
Yeah, no, I agree.
The apex predators that we are. So
can't forget where we came from. I mean, we live in these modern times and they're amazing. I wouldn't rate it any other in history, but I think that there's a lot of aspects of modern life, not just food, that should be questioned a little bit more, because how we handle it, how we tolerate it is questionable.
This is fascinating. Fascinating.
Well,
have we changed your mind? Has Team Meat changed your mind?
You have not, but again, I always keep an open mind. So is my mind, but I have other cultural, religious.
All right. Chicken.
Awoke. You might say awoke for other reasons, not to change my mind. But do I think that if you're a vegetarian and eating a lot of carbs like they do in lots of Southeast Asia, is that the right way to go? No, I'm well aware of the high incidence of cardiovascular disease in Southeast Asia, certainly probably related to the availability of rice, high incidence of diabetes and things like that. So, again, that's why I've always kind of gone the other way towards a Mediterranean diet. But again, I think what we can all agree on is that these data and the science within the food industry has been very poor. And so, the hope is that going forward, there can be more quality, blinded, randomized clinical trials to really understand and not have any political or big sugar or big anyone else, any big blank, whatever you want, kind of influencing the results or influencing the marketing. So,
and I think this topic is so complex and nuanced. So I want to shout out your podcast because it's really good.
Let us know where we can find you, like your podcast, your social media handle.
Can I finish?
Well, you talk so slow.
By episode, she delves into each of these topics. So, the fat one I think was really interesting. How we got away from animal fats, and my wife still thinks butter is bad, and I think butter is good. But we're drinking coconut, not drinking, but cooking with coconut and avocado oil and all that stuff. But those topics are, I guess, require a lot of attention and unpacking. So, we'll have you on in the future to maybe expound on a lot of those things, and also trying to convince my knucklehead friend over here that at least
listen, dialogue is healthy.
Popeye's chicken sandwich.
I'm never against dialogue, so it's great. But tell us where can people find you?
Yeah, so my podcast, The Road to Carnivore, is virtually on every podcast platform, iTunes, Spotify, all that. I'm also on Instagram at The Road to Carnivore, and that's pretty much it. I got a website, but mostly just on those two platforms, and it's all free. There's no sponsors, ads, and not being paid by anyone. It's just my true thoughts and the research that I've done and my experience.
So you're basically documenting your journey along this. So we appreciate that. We appreciate the new insight, your honesty, which we appreciate very much. And
can I read an ad? Is that okay? Yeah. I was supposed to read an ad.
Oh, you are?
Yeah. So this episode is brought to you by Nexium 24-hour.
Oh my God, come on.
When frequent heartburn strikes, I advise my patients to opt for a proactive treatment like Nexium 24-hour to minimize those symptoms.
Are you serious, or this is a joke?
It's a 14-day regimen, and just one pill provides all day and all night relief by blocking acid production. Excuse me, by blocking acid production directly at the source. We're getting paid for this, by the way.
I see.
So you can treat frequent heartburn before it gets in the way of enjoying your life. For more information, go to nexium24hour.com.
I don't know if you know this, but Dr. Coleman is now the spokesperson for Nexium. It's are you in any magazines? Are you? Let's see it. Oh my God! Well, where's your picture? Are you in? What is that?
Champagne.
For what?
Anyway.
For being on the ads. Okay. Well, she's telling us that if you go all carnivore, you won't have GERD anyway. You won't need for these PIs and H2 blockers. So maybe you should try
thinking.
Yeah.
Get rid of the thing causing the acid reflux instead of trying to cover it up, putting a Band-Aid on it.
His issue is actually too much chocolate and late night eating. So that's really what his GERD's coming from. So
that's your nickname, chocolate, isn't it?
We're trying to rectify. So just last question before we sign off is, so desserts, sweets, nothing, right? So ice cream, a cake every now and then. There's no, you know, and I'm not being funny, but I know in like, in England, they would have like meat cakes, right? I forget what they're called, but I mean, or sweet cake or sweet meats, maybe. Is any of that allowed? Or
sweet meat is your nickname.
Sweet. That was my nickname in college, along with brown sugar. But that's for various other reasons, but which we won't get into right on this episode. But
the next episode.
No sugar allowed at all. So there's absolutely no kind of desserts or sweets in the carnivore diet.
That is correct. I freely gave all those things up. Yeah. It's really just entertainment for your brain and your mouth. And, you know, one of the things with food that I realize is, and I think a lot of people do this, we use food as an instant out for emotions, for feeling things, for stress. Sure. There's so many ways that people use food, just like they use alcohol or other drugs. And so, you know, dessert, again, it's a free choice. But for example, this past Christmas, I realized afterward that I don't want to eat Christmas cookies anymore, even for the nostalgia with my kids. It was so painful. And it's something that I understand the purpose of dessert. I'm not going to say other people shouldn't do that, but when your two options are the health I get from carnivore and having these few moments of pleasure followed by acid reflux and hot flashes throughout the night and all this stuff, it's not compelling anymore. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't eat any of those things.
No, that's excellent. I'm actually giving it up myself. So during COVID time, there was a little bit too much of that available in the hospital. We were like all stress eating. It was very hectic for the last year and a half. And then I actually personally feel better. So I will agree with you with that one. I think sugar is unnecessary, and it's a teasing of the mouth and the body and the mind. Very temporal, very short lasting, and then you feel guilty. So
I mean, stress eating, what is that? That's when your body has a need. And instead of actually addressing that need, you use food to obliterate those emotions. I mean, that's not really self-care, you know? Yeah. It's counterproductive in so many ways.
Well, we want to thank you very much for coming on today. You know, I was, when Clinton had told me that you were coming on, I was like, wow, this is very interesting. I know it's not necessarily what lines up with my thought process, but you know, we're always looking for dialogue. We're always looking for new ideas, and you know, you certainly brought something that all of us are going to take a moment to ponder. So I really appreciate your candor, your honesty, your obviously knowledge. You're very knowledgeable and very well read. So I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, this is awesome. And I'm always, you know, I understand where you're coming from, because a few years ago I would have thought this was all crazy. So that's really how I approach my podcast. Is I get why people think it's insane. I did too, until, you know, I really started having that cognitive dissonance and just couldn't ignore what a profound impact it had in my life. So yeah, thanks for the conversation.
No, thank you. And we hope our listeners out there will take a listen to her podcast. But in the meantime, this is Dr. Suraj Saggar and my illustrious co-host / Nexium superstar, Dr. Clinton Coleman. Recommend Daily Dose. Find us on Spotify and everywhere else that you usually look for us. Until next time, be well.